Welcome back to one of our two breakout panels this morning or afternoon, wherever you might be. This one is called Organizing Your Agency for Transportation Equity. And we know that the transportation system is not equitable. Sometimes when we add shared mobility services, it might propagate more of that economic, racial, and social injustice, or maybe it might correct some of it. Transit agencies, DOTs, and transport companies need to address inequity, race, and social justice issues which, from the very core of the way they run things. And I am so excited to share our three panelists today who will talk about that and how they're trying to implement, how they're trying to reorganize their agencies to address transportation equity. We have Veronica Davis, Director of the Transportation and Drainage Operations of Houston Public Works, Adelee Legrand, the CEO of Hillsbourough Area Regional Transit, and Sam Zimbabwe, Director of the Seattle Department of Transportation. I'd like to ask my panelists to turn their videos and microphones on. Welcome. And Sam, I think you're still on mute. And then Veronica may have some connection issues, but you will hear her. There she is. All right. Well, thank you. We've got the heads of large agencies across the country who are working on making their systems more equitable. And so my starter question, and I will disappear into the background to ask all of them really is, so how are you organizing your agency to address equity, and what are the challenges?
Well, don't everyone jump at once. So good afternoon, everyone. Veronica Davis, and as you mentioned, I'm the Director of Transportation and Drainage for the City of Houston. I would say that the biggest thing that we're doing, largely, I'm very thankful for Mayor Sylvester Turner and his vision. I came into this role where he came up with what we call complete communities. Those of us on the transportation side, we talk about complete streets. But the mayor took it bigger to say, no, we need to have a complete community. And that means addressing all the needs within this community, whether it's open spaces, transportation and drainage related, art, job opportunities, and things of those natures. And so right now there's 10 complete communities to which completely a community driven process to develop an action plan. And so what we're doing now as an agency is going through those action plans to figure out what are the actions under our purview and moving those forward. Largely, the complete communities are made up of Black and Brown communities, lower income communities in some cases, not all, but largely communities that have been historically, there has been no investment, whether be it by public or private sector. And so this was the mayor's way of ensuring that we're putting our resources in the communities that need them the most. And so as an example, we are advancing several projects. Some of it is road diets, taking roads from 8-lane, basically highways through a community, reducing them down, adding in what we call high comfort bike lane, which is defined as a 10-year-old should be able to bike comfortably through that area. We're improving the pedestrian realm, adding in art with our mini murals program. So we work with the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs to do murals on our traffic cabinets. And so we have those around the city, and they're all community driven in terms of the art that goes on those. And so that's ultimately what we're trying to do. And as we look to this upcoming fiscal year, we are prioritizing the complete communities for investment. So as we are looking to upgrade intersections, about 50% of that money will be going into complete communities to address safety, to address just overall investment in those communities. And that's how we're organizing. The complete communities really is our North Star to make sure that we are providing those investments into those areas.
I'm happy to jump in and go next, unless Adelee, you want to?
Oh, that's fine.
Okay, I'll jump in. I'm Sam Zimbabwe. I'm the director of the Seattle Department of Transportation. I use he, him pronouns, and for those that, well, we're describing ourselves too. So I'm a middle-aged white guy who needs a haircut right now, and I've got a couple pieces of public art that are from the City of Seattle's collection over my shoulder I don't know which way is left and right for people watching, but I've got one of two goats. So if I ever get boring, you can just look at the goats, and that might keep your interest. SDOT is the city's transportation agency. We have about 1,100 employees serving a city of about 750,000 in a region that's a couple million people. We do everything from bridges to trees. We take care of the roadway. We have concrete crews and we have planners. We have signal electricians, soup to nuts, everything about transportation except for transit. We partner very closely with our transit partners at King County Metro and Sound Transit, running regional transit systems that serve the city and the surrounding communities. We've been working for several years on equity on a number of different pathways, both internal and external. And that's part of the city of Seattle's now close to 2-decade race and social justice initiative that dates back to 2004, that really tries to name and address systemic racism, and how what we do from an institution as the city seeks to overcome historic injustices and continuing and ongoing injustices as well. So a couple of the pathways that we're on, and we can talk more about this as we go through this conversation. We have an external transportation equity work group that we've convened for now a couple of years. It's been sort of groundbreaking work for us. We've done compensated community participation in that process, community representatives helping us to co-develop a transportation equity strategy. We have an internal group that we call our change team. Every city department has a change team that advances that race and social justice initiative and holds that fire and holds the leadership of each department accountable for continued progress on race and social justice. We've worked to figure out how to, so that group helps with training, with analyzing our work plans for racial equity, and thinking about ways that we can advance racial equity through everything we do, from our budget to how we show up to deliver services in the community. There's about 30 people on our staff that are part of that change team. We also have, we work on contracting equity, looking at how the money that we spend on delivering services and projects includes the full range of the community, women and minority owned businesses. We organize all of these activities into an Office of Equity and Economic Inclusion that keeps our leadership across the department, our senior management, our leaders in the department accountable to the goals that we've set and trying to advance them on all those fronts.
Well, thank you, Sam, and thank you, Veronica. I'm Adelee LeGrand. I'm the CEO here in Tampa, Florida. To follow Sam's lead, I guess I'm a middle-aged Black woman, so you have the counter. And I'm in my office, so there's nothing exciting that you can focus on. You're gonna have to listen to me or focus on one of the other panelists. So again, I'm happy to be here. And the question about equity in transit, where both Veronica is in public works and Sam is with the DOT, for us in the transit space, it's an interesting, I would say, mashup of understanding the community that you serve. And in most cases, it's the underserved population that is very dependent on transit, as well as understanding how money is actually being spent to provide mobility options for this community. So our approach here at HEART, I've been here since January, so I'm pretty new, but our approach here is to really embed the concept of equity in the work that we do internally across every department. So a little bit nuanced, I could say it's a little bit different than the other two presenters, where we don't have a standalone department or a standalone initiative that's focused on equity. Instead, what we're looking at is embedding everything that we do within the organization with the lens of understanding, first and foremost, the communities that we serve. And I would say that part of the journey that we're on is to really understand the customers and understand what it is that we're doing to help them. And I'll give you a specific example. Sometimes in the transit space, we're focused heavily on KPIs, key performance indicators, and on-time performance. And I just had a conversation with my team last week, and they were talking about an 80% on-time performance, and it felt pretty good. And I said, in a 2-week cycle, that means somebody's going to be late twice, right? So is that the type of service that we want to be known for, that if you work someplace and if you're late 3 times, they dock your pay? You can guarantee that once a month your pay is going to be docked because you're riding transit. So it's about having the conversation and understanding what we're doing through the lens of the communities that we serve. And again, it's not rocket science, but it's helping people to understand what it is that people are facing. The other thing I can tell you that's a little bit different from both Veronica and Sam's body of work or their space is that most people who work in transit, unfortunately, they do not use the product. So, if you work at a DOT, I can guarantee, I'll put money on it, Sam, that the majority of people who work in your environment have a car, or at least riding in a car. Same thing for you, Veronica. You probably have a lot of colleagues who are driving and using the road infrastructure. In the transit space, you have a lot of people who work here, but those people are driving to work and they're not really using the product. And the reason why that's a challenge is you don't really understand the customer's experience if you're not experiencing it yourself. And it's easy to get caught up in the conversations about, what service should look like or what mobility options are. So all of this, connecting it to equity, it's about, one, for me, really understanding the product, what we're putting out there, and how it's impacting the communities that we serve. 2, understanding how we're spending the dollars and are we putting the dollars in the right place. And then 3, not getting caught up in the sexy, fun concepts that are out there and getting distracted from your core needs, right? And that's more, mobility, new mobility, that's important. But if you make that be your priority and your core bus service is not being really, taken into consideration, and you're not optimizing that, but you're focused on a new pilot project for AVs, you're really not serving your community. So I would say for an intro, that's where we are, just really trying to change the culture within our organization. So we're deliberate in what we do.
Oh, I guess Benji's leaving it to ourselves to ask ourselves.
Okay.
So Adelee, I'll ask you first. What's been the biggest barrier in organizing or reorganizing to deliver on equity? Is it budget, staffing, integrating with the workflow, or work processes?
Okay, so this one is a very complicated question, so I have to put my question box up. So I would say it's cultural. So I would say the biggest challenge for me thus far, and I've been in here, for a complete 6 months, is getting people to start looking at things differently. You have folks in this public transit space at an agency who've been working here for a long time. You have some people who can tell you every bus route that they've ever had. And when you say, okay, we need to look at some things through a different lens, it's not really welcome. So one, it's really helping people to understand the value of the change, right? This change is going to benefit you by X, Y, Z. I would say that's definitely something that's important. Staffing, we go back to equity. For the most part in our organization, our operators, our bus operators, our mechanics, those who are in the union represent the community of Black and Brown people. But then when you get up to administration, it's flipped. So 85% of our frontline, if you will, workforce are Black and Brown folks. And then when you come up into administration, it's flipped, and 85 are non-people of color. So that's also something that's an equitable challenge. And, when you put that out there, first and foremost, and we're going to be completely, candid here, folks who are sitting in those positions, they don't see it as a problem, right? They see it as, well, I've had this position, I'm qualified, and you probably are, but are we recruiting? Are we creating a pathway for those who want to matriculate from one area to the other so that they can land in administration? Or have we created a systemic process so that people cannot, move forward, right? And if it's structured in a manner where you have systemic internal racism, or just, I would say, even if you don't call it racism, but a clear differentiation between the different groups as far as where they can work and what kind of opportunities they have, that's a problem that we need to fix. So I would say that's definitely one of them. And then lastly, integrating these changes into our SOPs and really sitting down and codifying what we're talking about. So it's not like this new CEO came with these crazy ideas, and then when she leaves, we can do our own thing, which technically I guess they could, But the hope is that you can start creating policies where people can see that there's a direct correlation between really identifying the strengths in our organization and being equitable, so that our workforce represents our leadership, which also represents our community. And if we can do that, then we can start solving some really big problems or challenges that we have. I see a question: how do I create processes that get your team to use the product? You know, it's back to the basics. You have to talk to people, you have to be in their face, and it's less about, at least in the transit space, it's less about the bells and whistles, and it's more about, let's pull out some paper and help you to understand where the value is. I am a firm believer, if people do not see themselves in the success of whatever you're launching, they're not going to get on board. So part of the education, if you will, is really helping folks to understand, you know, where are you and how is this going to benefit you? How are these changes going to improve your day-to-day operation or your day-to-day responsibilities, and then helping you to get on board. And, you know, I would say it's definitely hard work, but it's something that's needed. So now I'm going to pose a question, and the same question, and I'll ask Sam, what has been the biggest barrier in your organization or reorganization to deliver on equity? And is it the budget, staffing, integrating with workflow, or the work processes?
Well, I definitely build on what you said, Adelee, because I think that we see a lot of the same differentiation in some of our frontline workforce and our more office-based workforce. We've seen some of the disparate impacts of the pandemic and who can work from home and who can't work from home throughout over the last year, for sure. Creating those pathways to advancement has been a continuing sort of ongoing challenge for us that I don't think we've quite unlocked yet. I think one other sort of systemic challenge that or thing that I've identified is that we don't necessarily have. I think we can look at discrete, sort of isolated areas and say, are we getting equitable outcomes, like the composition of our workforce? But it's a little bit harder to figure out what the bottom line measure is of when we will have achieved equity and it may not be something that's sort of fully achievable. It might be an ongoing process. And so helping people look at what the interim milestones, like, what are we making progress? Are we getting there? Is this decision in keeping with where we're going? So a challenge around urgency. You talked about when, you know, is it just something that is while I'm here at SDOT and then it goes back to normal when I'm gone? And I think all of us in these leadership positions have this urgency of getting something done, and doing things too fast, sort of not building the culture that is advancing this sort of organically, can risk setting us back if we're not careful about that. So that's sort of more of a systemic organization culture that I haven't quite unlocked how to address. One thing that we have found is through that external transportation equity work group that we've convened, when they talk about what it means to build an equitable transportation system, they're often not talking about the same things that we're always talking about, like pavement condition and the timing of the lights and stuff like that. They're talking about true community safety, about affordable housing, about economic development. And that can often be something that's a little bit scary to a transportation department. That's outside of my lane. That's outside of something that I can control. And we have to think about what can we do to advance those true community priorities, which goes to what Veronica was talking about earlier too. So Veronica, I'll turn it to you to answer that same question about the biggest barrier that you've seen around reorganizing and delivering on equity.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I did neglect to describe myself. I'm I guess, middle-aged Black woman, although I like to hold on to my youth. In my background, I have a stop sign and a safety zone with kids. And then beyond that is the skyline of Houston, as I sit on the 25th floor. So that's my description. And I got on popping red lipstick. but not besides the point. So one of the things, I'll say it's two things that are barriers for us. So number one, I know you all heard Sam say he's got 1,000 employees for 750,000 residents. I have 900 employees for 2.3 million residents. And then physically, I don't know if people realize, physically, the city of Houston is huge. It is about the size of a typical county in most other states. So we are physically a large city. And we have this thing called water. So I have drainage under me. And so some of it is, some of our roads are designed to convey water. We do have storm sewer system. We have open ditches, but we also have roads that are designed to convey water. So on top of all the mobility challenges, I have drainage challenges as well. And so I say all that to say, when we talk about staffing, we are understaffed. I mean, for the mission that we are given, for the budget and what we do deliver, we are understaffed, but we get it done the best that we know how. I would say the other thing, adding on to whatever others have said, but our other biggest challenge is differences of philosophy with our state, and not because I don't want you all to snitch on me to say I was talking about TxDOT. It's not a TxDOT issue. It really is our state code becomes the issue. So even if our state DOT wanted to do something different, they are unable to. And it comes down to how money is handled in the city. So when federal money comes to the state, it gets commingled with the state, and therefore the most restrictive is what prevails. And with the state, 97% of our funding has to go to highways. So when we're talking about building highways through neighborhoods and all of that, we're up against a force, and it becomes our biggest barrier to really being able to implement equity. We have plenty of roads, we have plenty of bridges that we need to fix that are under the state purview. However, they have a different set of metrics that they have to meet. And so often it's thought of, these big mega highway projects. We're still expanding highways. We're still building brand new highways in neighborhoods that don't have highways. And that is probably the biggest barrier that we have to equity. The city in Harris County, we've had a lot of conversations, with our partners to express our point of view. But that just, it really becomes a challenge. But what I will say has been the opportunity, I've been in this position since January. I'm probably the first person in this position that has used other modes consistently. When I lived in the District of Columbia, I rode the bus and I biked way more than I drove. I expended more miles driving from DC to Houston than I had in DC in 2.5 years. And so when you have a person like me sitting at the helm of this position, it unlocks the staff. We have a really phenomenal engineering and planning staff, both within the Public Works Department. David Fields is the Chief Transportation Planner. He does not like to drive. He does drive. He did correct me. He does drive. He doesn't like to drive. But you have two people leading transportation for the city, to which we know that there are other ways. And this is a very car-centric city. And so it really has unlocked the staff to think bigger, to move through ideas. They send me pictures after the fact of things they've done. And I'm like, oh, that was cool. So we're doing a lot and implementing a lot. But I will say that is our biggest barrier, is our differences of philosophy with our state.
Well, that sounds great, Veronica. And I know David Fields, so tell him I said hello. He's awesome.
I will. He's but I talk to David like 3 times a day. We work very closely.
Yeah. So, and you raised some good points. And what I wanted to share on that, and Sam, you talked about, overall equity and connecting to, some of the initiatives that are going on outside of our windows. And one thing that I did learn through engaging with some of our partners, so we have community development centers here. I'm sure you probably have them as well, but they have these special programs in low income areas where you can get a house, you can purchase a house with some of their assistance at a lower rate. And what we learned internally is that, so for example, I'm sure your organizations are the same way, you may provide tuition reimbursement. And we provide tuition reimbursement as a benefit, but we notice when we do our stats, a lot of people are not taking advantage of it. And if they are, the courses that they're taking are really not helping them to move into a higher position in the organization. But an initiative that we're currently focused on is, what if we transition from offering tuition reimbursement to offering down payments on houses in these CDC areas? Because a lot of our, employees, especially on the front line, they're making, I would say lower wages, right? So you can be an entry-level bus operator and maybe you clear $40,000 a year. But if we were able to help, people in that cohort to purchase a home in a community that we're actually providing service, that does a couple of things. So that allows us to elevate the brand of a bus operator, elevate the brand of the organization, because now you're living in a community, people see you in your uniform, you're leaving to go to work, and it's also helped the person to have home ownership. So as it relates to connecting externally, yes, the affordable housing development, making sure we have bus routes there, as well as, the program to focus on folks who are being impacted by homelessness and how we engage with those organizations so that we're treating those people with the respect and dignity that they need, but also creating a safe space for our passengers, but also looking at how we can open up access to these programs for our employees who also, by all metrics are on the lower end or the lower spectrum of the economic scale. So I would say here internally, we're trying to look at our approach to equity from a holistic wraparound approach outside of just only what's happening externally, because we are also a part of the community. So I was curious to see if any of you have looked at ways to balance connecting to what's going on outside, as well as how it impacts you internally.
That's a great point. We've thought about different ways of building apprenticeship programs to bring people in and bring people into the workforce and build careers within SDOT. We haven't gone to the point of down payment assistance, and that's an interesting way to think about it. I also think about it, what it would mean in terms of our emergency preparedness and emergency responsibilities. What we've seen is a lot of folks getting displaced economically here in this region out further and further, and that weaken some of our ability to respond to emergencies when they come up. Veronica, if you want to answer that, yeah. And then we got a really good question, which maybe we can I can ask from one of our attendees, and I would encourage other people to keep chatting those in if you've got questions for us.
Yeah, I would say for us, I'd say one of the biggest thing, it's our facilities. So our facilities, in some cases, we are located in a community and we are looking to move out because we are impacting the community negative. We have a lot of big trucks that are coming in and out where people are living. And so that is one thing that we're doing where, from an equity perspective. And then there's also, we're having a lot of conversations now. We have areas of the city that is just in the 100-year floodplain. And so we are fighting a losing battle against water. But one of the things that we are doing is looking to see if there are opportunities to use our facilities as a place for that community to come in really severe rain events, almost like a lily pad in a sense. But we're having a lot of those type of conversations for how we, our impact on the communities around us. We have been working with HR to really begin to start challenging some of the job descriptions of why do you need a GED to be a skilled laborer or electrician, if you have your license. So it's a lot of those things of within our ecosystem that we can control across the city. It's asking ourselves the question, why does someone need to have this in order to do this job function? Or are we creating a barrier for people to be able to come in and work with us and have a good paying job? I'm sure that everyone would love to make more, but it's still a good paying job.
So I see one question that's come in from the Q&A, and maybe we can spend a little bit of time on this one, which said that this person wants to challenge the notion that transit equals equity and roads do not, and that access to cars is also an equity issue, and communities of color want good highway access as well as transit, and the buses use the road. So I don't know, Veronica, if you want to start on that, and then maybe the buses question, Adelee, you want to tackle that one. I have my own thoughts too.
Yeah, I can start. I don't know that anyone has said that roads don't equal equity. I think that for us, it's looking at how those roads are used in different communities. Because the reality is, when I look at our high injury network where people are dying and being seriously injured, 60% of those are happening on 6% of our roads. So we do need to look at the roads to make them safer. And sometimes that means putting them on a road diet. Sometimes it means something else. But I don't know that any of us would say that roads don't equal equity. They exist. But it's how we are using those roads for other modes, whether it is putting in bike lanes, where we can put in sidewalks, we have a challenge because of the open ditches. So that constrains us a little bit. And also too, where are we investing to improve roadways? We have the Mayor Street Rehab Initiative where we are to, rehab 2% of our roadways every year. We try to make sure that we are doing the worst streets. Largely happens to be in Black and Brown communities, but we are addressing those and counting those as our lane miles to improve the quality of those streets and the quality of the ride. So I still think even with the roads issue, it's not just about the road itself or a vehicle itself. It is the bigger picture of that investment in those areas.
And I'll jump in, Veronica. And, again, I agree with you. I don't think any of us would say that the roads are not a part of an equity conversation associated with mobility. Roads are a key component. I would, like to say that as a person of color who grew up in New York City, who, lived in the Black community, people want access to lots of things, and they want to make sure that the way they get there is safe, it's dependable, it's affordable. What they don't want is to live in a community that has high asthma rates, that have high low mortality rates, that have been, bifurcated because someone else in a department someplace else that never spoke to them realized that the fastest distance between 2 points was through a Black community. And now they don't really have the access that they had to just visit somebody who lived a couple of blocks away. So when we talk about transportation and we talk about roads and the equity conversation, unfortunately, because of the history of how transportation has been funded and the impact on Black and Brown communities, you do spend a lot of time focusing on how can we fix what was done I would say inappropriately in the past. And I shouldn't only say in the past, because this is continuing to go on today. So just, to be clear, it's not that roads are not a part of the conversation, but it's how are we building and planning for these roads to ensure that the people who are going to be the greatest, those who will be impacted the greatest by this investment are also benefiting from it, right? So if we're going to put a highway through a community, but you can't really access the highway until you go into somebody else's community, did that benefit you? So that's one. Two, we're in 2022. You hear Veronica talking about floods in Houston. Sam's talking about roads buckling because the heat is over 120 degrees. It is prudent for us to really look at our investment in transportation through a lens of sustainability and being focused on the environment. And that also means that we need to figure out how we do more with other modes within the infrastructure that we currently have. So that goes to the buses question, right? So yes, the buses don't float in the air, not yet, but we need to find the right road networks that make the most sense to have the right type of bus system on those roads. So if it's an arterial, if Veronica's team has designed it so it's safe and it's safe for people to get off the bus at night and walk a couple of blocks to go to their home without being afraid, and there's great lighting and the cross streets are great and they're ADA compliant, then that's a great, road network for us to put our buses. But if the streets do not have curb cuts and there are no lights and it's not providing access and the buses, the turn radius is not going to be supportive because you're going to crash into somebody's parked car in a community, then it's not going to be supportive. So it's really about us as the transit agency working closely with Public Works and the Department of Transportation to ensure that when we make these investments or we place these routes and communities, that we're looking at it through a holistic mobility lens and not just what's good for me or what's good for Veronica or what's good for Sam, but we're all working together for the same ultimate goal, which is to improve mobility for our communities.
I don't think I could say it any better than what both of you have said. I'd only add too that I think what we're dealing with in terms of that legacy of bad decisions or impactful decisions that I heard Adelee, you say, we're seeing that here. We have the same communities that were impacted by redlining that were economically impacted for years, for generations, in terms of the ability to build wealth and things like that, are also the same places where we're seeing housing displacement right now, and people being sort of forced further from where their communities are located and into places that have much worse transportation choices than they've been able to access before. And so that economic displacement, which follows the same racial trajectory that those previous policies of highway construction, of housing segregation, yielded, we have to be careful not to sort of recreate transportation segregation in the same way, and to not to be seen as doing things to communities that are being impacted in all these ways and don't have control in so many different ways, but try to figure out what and how to help. And I think, what we saw during the pandemic here in Seattle, office workers were able to transition and work from home. The essential workers, which tended to be people of color more than the office workers, we still had places with really high bus ridership throughout every day of the pandemic. And those are the places that I'd like to try to make sure we're making improvements and supporting people as we go forward, not just making it faster to come downtown for an office commute. That, frankly, we might be able to figure out ways to not have everybody have to come downtown all the time, and keep those same arteries open for people that have no choice but to move around and get around to their jobs. So, I think it's really about that partnership. It goes back to what Veronica said at the top of the hour of complete communities, and how are our transportation investments advancing what communities want to see. Looks like we have one more question. I know we're starting to run out of time, but Adelee, you said something earlier about getting distracted by the shiny objects. The question is about whether technology is at all useful for addressing equity issues or making the transportation system more equitable. So maybe you want to start off on that one.
So thanks. And yeah, sometimes technology is a shiny object. I think first and foremost, you have to engage with people. It could be like this with Zoom. It could be sitting at their table in their kitchen over a cup of tea or coffee, but we can't just outsource the decision-making to technology. And that's my only concern, right? It seems like people are like, oh, there's this vendor and they created this tool and that's all we have to do is implement it. We need to take a little step backwards and really talk to people and find out what it is that they need from us, so that when we implement the technology solution, it's actually a solution to a problem that the community is facing. So yes, technology is great and it's good that we have it, but we just need to use it in a mindful way.
Yeah, so I will add, I think one of the challenges of, the technology is often when you look at who is working on the technology. And so when we talk about building, equity and inclusive communities, it helps to have people from those different communities, just people who are bringing different perspectives to those conversations. But when you look at the tech world, there is a lack of diversity. And so it's even not related to transportation, but there was like the article of how hand washing sensors couldn't detect Black skin because no one ever thought to try it on Black skin. So even then, when you think about technology, you still run the risk of some of the same issues when they're not engaging all the different types of user groups. You adopt that, and then now you're trying to adapt it to meet other people's needs, and it becomes more headache than helpfulness.
And I'd just add that I feel like this is a place that I've had to learn painfully sometimes, that availability is not the same as access, and that making something available to people doesn't mean that they'll be able to use it. And there's often higher barriers in terms of generating equitable access. So that goes to shared mobility, that goes to even like real-time trip arrival information, and how you access the information that might unlock a faster commute, cheaper commute, more available things. And then even just building the infrastructure that ability for a 10-year-old to ride a bike on a street that Veronica, you talked about, if the last 3 blocks to your house is unsafe and you as a parent wouldn't let your kid ride to that other arterial, then it's not really accessible and possible for them to use. So really thinking about how technology, the availability of it in and of itself doesn't guarantee access and equity.
Or even, Sam, to pick up on that, having a bike share program in a community where people don't have money to buy bikes, and a lot of people don't know how to ride a bike, so there are the little things that sometimes people take for granted if you're not talking to the community and really understanding what their capabilities are. If you're like struggling every day, you didn't run out and buy your kid a bicycle. So now they're a grown person or a teenager, they don't know how to ride a bike. So again, there are lots of things that we can do, lots of ways we can use technology, but I agree with Veronica, we need to make sure that that approach is also equitable and the right people are behind designing the technology to meet the needs of the community.
Welcome back, Benji.
Thank you. This has been I didn't want to pop back in yet because you guys are having such an amazing conversation, and to have it from the leaders of agencies. There's a quick question that maybe we can go around quickly. Like, if you're hiring for equity or your equity teams, what are you looking for in terms of qualifications for people, whether it's promoting internally or hiring externally? Because some people in the audience want to know.
Well, I'll go first. I would say the biggest thing that we're hiring for, particularly for the higher levels, is just overall leadership, ability, and acumen. I think that sometimes, particularly with engineers, they may be the greatest technical person, but that does not mean they need to be leading anybody. And so that is what we're looking for. And so sometimes we will hire from outside. Sometimes we promote from in. It has gone both ways. I'm the hire from outside, but that's the biggest thing I would say is just overall just leadership skills.
I'd say the commitment to admitting when you're wrong and when you need to learn, and ability to have some introspection too. We're going through with our senior management team and that change team that I mentioned earlier, what we're calling a transformational equity leadership cohort. We're trying to build the equity leadership because it's really hard to generate that any place but sort of in shared lived experience with each other and sort of figuring out how to support each other as a team advancing equity work. So that's really the ability to open yourself up to know when you don't know all the right answers is really critical.
And I would say I agree with both Veronica and Sam, so we can mash up both of their answers into one. And also, I'm looking for leaders who understand the community we serve. You can't be afraid of people who don't look like you, who don't sound like you, who don't walk the same path. And, I guess that would be called empathy, but I'm really looking for folks who can see our customers and see them as people who are worthy of the best service we can offer.
Thank you so much. I mean, I hope our participants join me in thanking this amazing panel of leaders talking about reorganizing so that we address the equity issues of this big challenge of what we need to shift.